Hello and welcome to my last video snippet, giving a taste of my new book, The Sun Will Grow Dark, The Moon Turn to Blood. And in this particular video, I want to look at two of the chapters, one on the Antichrist and one on the temple. There are other chapters, of course. There's a chapter on the millennium. There's a chapter on the New Jerusalem and so forth. So I haven't covered all the chapters in these little video snippets, but I do want to give you a taste of two final chapters for this series, one on the Antichrist and one on the temple. And here we go. So chapter 6 in the book is The Antichrist is Coming. And of course, the word Antichrist comes from 1 John. If you're watching the video, you can see these passages in 1 John where 1 John mentions Antichrist. Now, 1 John doesn't say the Antichrist is coming. The word the isn't there. It says you've heard that Antichrist is coming. Now, that doesn't mean an Antichrist is coming necessarily either. The Greek word for the doesn't necessarily work that way. There are many Antichrists. And of course, John's talking about many Antichrists are here. He's writing in the late 1st century, probably. And so it's interesting that the word we use for this figure, the Antichrist, isn't actually ever used in the Bible in relation to a single individual. I thought that's one of the little nuggets. This book, if you buy this book, or I don't know, get a copy from somebody, you will find lots of little nuggets like this that I think are very interesting. But of course, I wrote the book, so of course I'm going to think that they're very interesting. So interesting, that's where the word Antichrist comes from. But our core concept of the Antichrist comes from the middle of the book, comes from the book of Revelation, and especially the middle section. There are two beasts. There are actually two beasts in this middle section, the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. To me, Revelation 17, verses 9 through 11, which are here in these text boxes, is where ground zero is for me for understanding this figure in the book of Revelation. In fact, if you want to know where the kind of situation of the book of Revelation is, where does Revelation situate itself in history? These verses are the ones. This is the key to unlocking the book of Revelation. I'll just read it. The 7 heads are 7 hills, and where the woman is sitting on them. And there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is now. The other is not yet come. He's going to reign for a little bit when he comes. The beast is the 8th, but he's from the 7th. What's going on here? Well, let me just give you a few hints. First of all, 7 hills. The book of Revelation was written to 7 churches that actually existed, Ephesus, Laodicea, and so forth. These were 7 actual churches. Revelation is a letter in part. It's several things, but it's a letter to these 7 churches. These were real places. And so, what would they have thought? Well, it is the overwhelming consensus of scholars that if you hear these 7 hills, they're going to think Rome. I mean, anybody in the Roman Empire who lives in the 1st century when the book of Revelation is being written, you hear 7 hills with kings, you're going to think Roman emperors and 7 hills. So it is no surprise that it is also the consensus. This may be a surprise because, of course, your pastor probably isn't a Bible scholar. Did he say that? It's true. Your pastor probably isn't a Bible scholar. And in fact, a lot of the people who pass for experts in the church aren't really scholars. They're kind of self-taught people, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. You can be very, very, very knowledgeable as a self-taught person. But let me just say this. It is the overwhelming consensus of scholars that the ground image here of the beast is the Emperor Nero. Now, let me say, as I've said before in this series, there is ambiguity in the book of Revelation. So it says that the beast is one of the first 5, but he's also the 8th. And so is that the Emperor Domitian as the 8th, or is Nero a type of some end times figure? So again, I don't think that I can tell God how he's going to manage the end times. It may very well be that God has some arch enemy of God that will arise in the end times, who is this 8th king. So it's possible that Nero is a type of an end. Far be it from me to tell God how to end the world. However, it is very well agreed that the prototype for the beast, at the very least, is the Emperor Nero. Let me just point out a few other passages we talk about in this chapter. So here in chapter 13, it talks about that one of the heads of this beast, it was like it had been slain, and yet he'd come back. Well, believe it or not, there is evidence of this idea that Nero would come back. We call it the Nero redivivus, Nero revived theory. There is a Jewish book called the Sibylline Oracles that talks about this. This apparently was a rumor. And this happens when someone who's larger than life, good or bad, dies. Sometimes it's hard for people to believe, are they really dead? I mean, this was true with Hitler, for example. There were a lot of people who thought, no, Hitler couldn't have died. He escaped. He just faked his own death. He's somewhere in South America with those other people, And so there were people who were like that with Nero. Nero can't be dead. By the way, the number 666, if you take the letters of Caesar Nero and you put them in Hebrew and you convert them into numbers, they come out as 666. So again, the majority of scholars believe that the prototype for this beast is in fact the Emperor Nero. Well, I need to stop because I want you to buy this book and read the rest of it. So there's only one more thing I want to talk about in this chapter, and that's the passage on the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians 2. This is one of the most puzzling passages to me in all of Scripture. And of course, people would say, well, that's because it's about the end times, Ken. Well, the thing is, he talks about him setting himself up in the temple as God. Well, there was a temple at the time that Paul, so I speculate a little bit about what this might have to do. By the way, something that you might not know is that there was a guy who tried to set a statue of himself up in the temple. Caligula, the emperor number 3, tried to set himself up in a statue in the temple as God. So I think anybody reading the book of Revelation would have heard in the background Caligula in the background of this. Now there are of course some who take the temple as spiritual and the church or whatever. There's an ambiguity to this passage, which is what I've said before. Maybe this is going to be true again in the end times. But there was in fact a temple at the time Paul was writing, and there was a desecration of the temple that took place in AD 70. So again, we'll know when it happens, right? Hindsight will be 20/20 when this all comes to pass. But let me now use this passage as a segue to the question of the temple and the end times. I've said it before, there's no passage when read in Scripture in context that suggests that a temple will be rebuilt. And there is no passage in Scripture that suggests that the temple will be destroyed again. Why? Because it happened already. All of the passages about the temple being rebuilt happened before 516 BC, and the temple was rebuilt in 516 BC. And the passages in Mark 13 about the temple being destroyed, it happened in AD 70. So there is no passage when taken literally. Now, God can interpret passages extra, so far be it from me to tell God what to do. But there's no passage that says post 70, a temple will be rebuilt and destroyed. So, like I said, in 2 Thessalonians 2 here, there is a temple there. And I want to then close with this other chapter, chapter 7, which goes into this into more depth. Again, here's passages in Haggai that talk about the temple being rebuilt. Well, it was rebuilt. All of those are already fulfilled. But let me say this. Some people might say, well, what about the temple in Ezekiel 40 through 45? Well, let me say that the book of Hebrews is emphatic. Jesus has entered the true temple, the heavenly temple. There is no more need for an earthly temple. If you read Revelation 22:21, there is no temple in the New Jerusalem because God is there with us. And Jesus tore the veil, right? When Jesus dies, we have access to the Holy of Holies. Bottom line here, the glory of God, it is not biblical. In fact, it is an insult to Jesus to say that the glory of God would ever enter a earthly temple. Do not donate money to rebuild the temple, because there can be no temple on earth that is not a counterfeit temple. Because the true temple is in heaven. Hebrews is emphatic. There is now no need for any earthly sacrifice. There's no need for red heifers. Any red heifer is a slap in the face of Jesus. It's like the book of Galatians. I'm offering this for free and you want to earn it. That's basically an abomination of a thought to God. There can be, and let me say this emphatically from Christian theology, there can be no earthly temple that has God's blessing as a place of sacrifice. Because there is one true temple that is in heaven. Jesus has entered it, and he has once and for all offered a sacrifice for sins. Any sacrifice on earth that pretends to take away sins is a fake sacrifice. There can be no earthly temple, again, with God's blessing. And therefore, Ezekiel 40 through 45 cannot be in reference to any actual concrete temple in the future, because there is only one temple from AD 70 on. There is only one temple, and that's the true heavenly temple. And so don't get distracted. Don't get deceived. Mark 13 says that many will come and deceive, and that possibly even the elect would be deceived. There can be no earthly temple that offers sacrifices with God's blessing on earth. Well, if you want to know more, this is my new book. The sun will grow dark, the moon turn to blood. You can get it for, I think, $12.99 on Amazon. It's $10.99 for the ebook on Shopify, and of course the paperbacks are also available on Shopify. A little less expensive on Shopify than on Amazon, but you can get them on Amazon as well. I also am glad to, if you want to use this for a Bible study, I'm glad to give you a 20% discount as long as you order more than 10 copies. Contact me individually at host@kenshankbooks.com. If you want to hear more about bulk discount. Well, thank you for watching these videos. These videos about my new book, The Sun Will Grow Dark, the Moon Turn to Blood.